The day it happened, there wasn't a fight. That's what people misunderstand when they hear the story later. They imagine raised voices, slammed doors, a spectacle that justifies leaving. What I remember is the kitchen. The afternoon light caught on the steel sink, the smell of cardamom tea, my mother's voice low and precise, as if she were adjusting a hem. "Hell give you the life my son never could," she said to my fiancée, not looking at me. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient. I waited for someone to notice I was still in the room. When no one did, I understood the rules had changed without my consent. I packed a bag that evening and left a note that said nothing useful. I didn't tell them where I was going because I didn't know. I only knew where I wasn't staying. Silence became my method. Not dramatic silence, just the absence of explanation. I learned that if you don't argue with gravity, you fall faster, cleaner. I took a job that required numbers more than names, policies more than personalities. My days filled with work that measured outcomes instead of intentions. Nights were quiet. Pain doesn't disappear when you stop talking about it, it just loses its audience. Years went by the way years do, in invoices paid on time, in habits acquired without ceremony. I learned how to move cities with 2 suitcases. I learned that competence is a language that doesn't ask about your family. Somewhere in that time I met her, not at a party, not during a rescue, but across a table scattered with documents. We spoke about constraints. We respected deadlines. Love arrived disguised as trust. We married without announcements. We kept our lives parallel and aligned. When her career accelerated, it wasn't because of me, and when mine steadied, it wasn't because of her. We shared calendars and late dinners, a way of being together that felt sturdy enough to lean on. The invitation list for the gala was unavoidable. The organization I ran had reached a scale where absence would be interpreted as incompetence. The event marked the launch of a public-private partnership, funding tied to urban development, infrastructure that would outlast us. Attendance by certain families was expected. Declining would have been noticed. Accepting was simply procedural. The room was glass and soft light, everything polished to suggest transparency. People moved in practiced arcs. When my mother arrived with my brother and his wife, I noticed how easily they wore confidence. It had aged into something comfortable. Recognition crossed my brother's face like a passing weather system, uncertain, then dismissive. I didn't approach. Hosts don't roam. I stayed where the work was visible. When someone addressed me, I listened. When they spoke about the past, I redirected them to the future. I watched my mother scan the room for leverage she recognized. She found none. Authority enters rooms differently than anger. It doesn't announce itself, it's announced. My wife arrived late because meetings run late. There was no apology. The program adjusted around her absence like it always did. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chair said, and the room responded. "We're honored to welcome the minister." Her title landed first. Names follow titles when titles matter. She shook hands, signed a folder without ceremony, and took the microphone for exactly 3 minutes. She spoke about funding mechanisms and accountability, about why signatures matter. When she thanked the host organization, she used my name because it was correct. The announcement was clean. The commitment was public. The shift happened in a single sentence: approval granted, funds released. The room recalibrated. I saw my mother's smile pause, not break, just hesitate, as if an old map had been unfolded in a new city. My brother's confidence searched for something to grip and found polished glass. They didn't look at me right away. They looked at her. Then they looked at me with new eyes, as if I'd been mislabeled, and the correction was inconvenient. There was no confrontation because there was no need. I didn't introduce them. Protocol did. When we crossed paths later, the exchange was formal. "You're hosting," my mother said, as if discovering a fact rather than acknowledging a history. "Yes." I said it was accurate. My brother asked about my work. I described it in the same terms I used for everyone else. His wife, my former fiancée, stood a half step behind him, composed, unreadable. We nodded to one another. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement without invitation. What they couldn't ask, what hovered, unsaid, were whether this was all done for them. It wasn't. Lives don't bend backward like that. The authority in the room hadn't arrived to correct a family story, it had arrived to sign documents. Later, when the last guests filtered out and the staff began stacking chairs, I found my wife near the windows, reviewing notes. She looked up and smiled in that way that meant the day had been long but successful. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. It was still accurate. We left together without being followed outside. The city did what cities do, moved on. I thought about the kitchen, the cardamom tea, the efficiency of a sentence that rearranged my life. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Power, I've learned, doesn't need to announce itself twice. It settles into routines, into signatures that hold. Some relationships don't end in explosions, they end in distance formalized. Dignity returns the way it leaves, quietly, when you stop asking permission.